Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for Arcoiris Latinx, the Latinx Rainbow, presented by the ALAS program at Grand Rapids Community College, a student engagement program through the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. For our audience this afternoon, please utilize the Q&A box if you have questions that you would like shared with our panelists throughout the discussion. People outside of Latinidad sometimes fail to understand that members of the Latinx community can be Black, Native, white, Asian, or mixed. Our skin tones come in many shades. Our diverse Latinx panelists today will discuss their experience living in their Latinidad within the United States and how colorism has impacted perceptions and relationships within the Latinx community in which they participate. I am Sonia Hernandez, Assistant Director of the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion here on the campus of Grand Rapids Community College, and I will be moderating today's discussion. I would like to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves, and once you've had the opportunity to meet them, we will dive in. We will begin with our first panelist, Consuela Barber Lopez. Consuela? Looks like Consuela doesn't have her camera on, so we'll start with Norman. Norman Bent.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Norman Bent. Hola, ¿cómo están todos? Espero que bien. Okay, so what I just said, it was in Miskito. That's my native language. I'm from Nicaragua originally. Born in Bilhuascarma, which is a native in Miskito Indian town in Nicaragua on the northern part of the coast of Nicaragua. I'm the director of STEM education and pre-college in the pre-college office here at the University of Detroit Mercy. And I've been here for about going on 2 years now.
Norman, thank you for being here today. Sergio.
Thank you for having me on, Sonia. Yes, my name is Sergio Cira Reyes. I'm working with the Urban Core Collective on environmental justice and other work, also with the Latino Community Coalition, the Latino Network. Thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you so much for your time today. Consuela, if you can introduce yourself, that would be great.
Hola, my name is Consuela Lopez. I'm Executive Director of AMATLA, which is the Community Law Enforcement Advocacy. And I'm the chair of ALPAC for Southeast Michigan.
Thank you for being here this afternoon. Anna.
Hello, everyone. Asanya, thank you so much for the invitation. My name is Ana Jose. I'm the program manager for the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. I run a program called Transformando West Michigan. I work very closely with Latinx businesses in our community. I'm also a board member for the Latina Network. I'm the trustee for the Latina Network. And it's a pleasure to be here with you guys today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to have you. Last but definitely not least, Rafael.
Buenas tardes. Good afternoon. My name is Rafael Pastrano. I was born and raised in Venezuela. I came here when I was 17 years old, and I've been here since. So I consider myself kind of a mix between American and Venezuelan, right? I'm 28 years old. I work full-time at Grand Rapids Community College as a staff member in the distance learning department. And I also do or serve part-time in the Army National Guard as a guardsman. I'm a cook in the Guard. I can cook pretty well, I might have to add. I'm also very thankful to be invited to participate in this panel. So thank you, Sonia, for that. And I look forward to the discussion.
Absolutely, thank you. So let's get started. According to a 2014 survey by the Pew Research Center, 24% of roughly 54 million Hispanics that lived in the United States at that time self-identified as Afro-Latino, Afro-Caribbean, or as another more specific Afro-Latino identity, such as Afro-Colombian. At the same time, 34% identified as mestizo, mulatto, or some other mixed race. Knowing how to identify ourselves with labels is confusing and sometimes frustrating. How do you identify your identity in the context of Latinidad? Sergio.
It took me a long time to come to this, but I see myself as Purépecha. I feel like Latinos is just a similar experience that we share here in the US, but now I see myself as Purépecha, Native American from Michoacán, Mexico.
Okay, awesome. How about you, Ana? When you did the census this year, how did you identify?
One of the things that, to be honest with you, Sandra, I never had a struggle with this because I always identified as an Afro-Latina. And although when I was growing up, I had a lot of issues because a lot of people will call me anything but Latina at all. But I made it a point that for me, it was extremely important to be recognized as an Afro-Latina who really, who I am.
Why is that important to you, Ana?
It's extremely important because it's not only about me. A lot of time when we think about identity, we might focus on culture makers, things like the clothing that we wear, the biological and physiological makers, things like the skin color. But I always try to take it a little bit deeper. It's recognizing where my grandmother came from, the struggles that she went through, the things that she has to put up with in order for me to have the space that I have now. So it's extremely important for me to make it clear that Latinidad it's a collaboration of so many in my life, especially my family as a whole.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing. How about you, Rafael? When you identify within your Latinidad, how do you identify?
I have to say that if it wasn't because I was invited to this panel, I wouldn't have thought so much about it. I think there's so much in that to unpack. But where I am right now in my life, I really don't like being put in a box because oftentimes I don't actually fit the profile. And people might think things about me that might actually not be real according to what I believe or feel or whatnot. So I like to think that I'm a free thinker. I like to rationalize things and to actually wrestle with the ideas. But if I have to say, to me, it boils down to culture. Yes, my skin is brown. I'm upset that I cannot put my race as brown or café con leche or something cooler like that, because you're either, in my case, I technically, legally, I'm white in all my papers, but which is fine, not bad or wrong, but I don't feel like I belong in that section, if you would. But I'm also not black. I am brown, I think. I look at myself and I look brown. So, but I'm Venezuelan, I think, above all, because of the strong cultural aspects that brings to my daily life.
Rafael, you muted yourself.
Sorry, what I eat, how I talk, how I view certain things about the world, our family dynamics, all of that comes directly from the Venezuelan culture. So I stick with a Venezuelan that is also a free thinker and is not afraid of looking at questions that are hard and terrible right in the eyes and just dealing with them.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. Consuela, how do you identify when faced with a question about your Latinidad and your identity?
I guess for me, it was always growing up here in Detroit. It was always my identity was always questioned, but I never had questions about who I was or who I am. I do understand my cultural heritage and the legacy from my ancestors, and if I didn't know that, I probably would have had a lot of problems identifying as anything because On one side, I'm not Latin enough, and on the other side, I'm not Black American enough. And so I just decided that I was going to be me, and that was enough. And if anyone didn't deal with it, that's their fault because they couldn't be as sexy as I was. That's it.
Sharing that. And Norman, when faced with a identity question, how do you identify within your Latinidad?
So the first thing that I want to say is, growing up, I mean, when I said who I am, I first wanted to acknowledge my Indian heritage and my African heritage. I oftentimes have this conversation with my Latino brothers and sisters that I may live in a Spanish-speaking country, but it's important for people to understand that I'm not Latino. I'm Native Indian with African descent, and that's important for me, for people to understand that. And oftentimes I think we miss that diversity within our own population. As we speak right now, in my country of Nicaragua, we're going through, many of you may know the history of Nicaragua, may not know. We went through a revolution for many years, like many Central American countries. And we're about to have a election coming up next year. And the president of the country has said that, that we all have to participate. Yes, we do, because elections are important, as we experience that in this country today. But the fact that how much our people have been forgotten, that's why it's important for me to keep my language. I speak of my language because that's me, that's who I am, and that's where I come from. And we are embarked in a project right now at home to continue keeping our language among our younger ones. So it is important that as Latinos, brothers and sisters, we know our diversity, we know how diverse we are. I did not speak Spanish because I was not allowed to speak Spanish until the 4th, 5th grade. That was during the dictatorship of Somoza many years ago, many years back. But that is our history, so Spanish is a language I learned, but I spoke my native language, and I spoke my Creole, and I spoke my other Sumo language, because we also have Sumo Indians and Garifuna Indians in Nicaragua. And so that's important, that's important to me, and that's who I am. But at the same time too, I have to recognize that I live in a Spanish-speaking country too. Just like how our Native Americans here, our brothers, Native American sisters and brothers here in America, they're the first people. And we have to acknowledge that and recognize that. So that's when I think of Afro-Latino, I want to also talk about the importance of the other part of the non-Latino portion of who we are and where Native people are from.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that and part of your history. It's very informative.
Sure.
When you are doing your work, whether it's through the Latino Network or Urban Core Collective, how have you seen colorism affect people within the Latino community?
Are you asking me?
Sergio. Mm-hmm.
Oh, Sergio. Sorry.
I think what I've seen is it makes us aspire to be white. It makes us want to shed our culture and our history and our heritage to an extent. I think, and this is important to recognize that this is within our own community. So Latinos, like, we compare ourselves to each other, and then we've grown up, at least in my personal experience, is like some of the conversations we're going to talk about, it just makes us, we've internalized that racism, we've internalized almost like some inferiority complex to where we aspire to be something else that we're not. And there's a premise there, it's a false premise that there's something wrong with who we are, where we came from. And that's the way I've seen it. And I think this shows up in communities voting, against their best interests. And it shows up with communities oppressing their own people and identifying with other communities that they're not from. And so that's how I've seen it. I think it's been used to divide us. It's been used to draw these lines between amongst us that that we're then pitted against each other.
You made some very valid points that this conversation really could go on for more than an hour. It's such a deep topic. So thank you for sharing that. And Consuela, I saw you shaking your head in affirmation, and I'm familiar with some of the work that you do. So how have you seen colorism play a part in your community? Consuela, you're still muted.
I should unmute myself. Okay. Some years ago, I was a part of a panel talking about Latinidad, and there's a guy who sat next to me who was from Spain, and there was another lady who was also Puerto Rican, but she was light skinned, almost white, right? And so the question from the journalist was asked, how does it feel to have your native language now being accepted, you know, whatever. And I said, to go along with some things that Norman and Sergio said, is that we view ourselves through a colonial lens. English and Spanish are European countries that colonized the Americas. And as long as we don't accept that reality and the legacy that has impacted our identity, everything that we do culturally, everything that we do, and it's the reason why still today, and if you look at media, look at only thing you see are light-skinned people. When I think of Amada La Negra, how she has to prove who she is when a black man rubbed her skin to see if her blackness was going to rub off because he wasn't sure that she was actually black. And when it comes to like colorism here in where I live at, the most of the leaders look down on me because they don't assume that I'm one of them. Or when I'm in positions of leadership, they say that I won't look out for Mexican people. And that's not the problem. That's not the point. And they know that. So to me, it's just recognizing the impact of colonialization in our culture in today and how it's impacting us.
Yep. Thank you. There's an age-old saying that it's like a childhood rhyme that says, if you're black, stay back. If you're brown, stick around. If you're yellow, you're mellow. If you're white, you're all right. Think about that. Those are rhymes that people have used to describe the acceptance of certain skin tones. Light is often used in media, like you said, Consuelo, to represent what's good, while darkness is often used to represent what's bad. And since the famous doll study back in the 1950s, researchers have known that young children are profoundly aware of our nation's disdain for all things dark. The association with dark skin is associated with criminality, and it's become one of the most deep-seated stereotypes in American society. And so with that, I want to share that 6 in 10 US Hispanic adults say they have experienced discrimination or have been treated unfairly because of their race or ethnicity, but their experiences vary by their skin color, according to the study done by the Pew Research Center. So power and status within communities has historically been created through skin color and other physical attributes. And that is one of the many lingering effects of colonization, right? And this belief that whiteness is better. Ana, how have you experienced this belief that whiteness is better or lighter is better?
Thank you for the question, Sonia. And, you know, I'll be as transparent as I possibly can with you because I've been affected by this so many times. I could be in a room with colleagues of mine and I could have been presented as Ana Jose without the title at times. And I've been trying to introduce myself and mingle with the other people in the room. And I noticed that for some reason, my appearance or the color of my skin is the one that actually takes over the whole situation. There's a lot of biases among our own communities. There's a lot of biases among ourselves as Latinos. And typically our own race at time, the only thing that they see is the color of your skin, right? They don't really stop and talk to you because they don't feel that what you have to say is important enough, because the only thing that they could actually see is the color of your skin. They don't know whether or not you have a degree. They're not really interested in what you bring to the table. They're more interested in how that picture is going to look with the person that they're going to be taking the picture with, right? And they don't know that you are professional. They don't know that you could probably make huge contribution to the community as a whole. So what I've learned from that, to be completely honest and transparent, I will always stand on my grounds. My voice is one that I'm not going to put aside. I'm not going to ask for forgiveness or permission. This is what you get. And it comes to a point that if it's not enough for you, that's fine. But my reality is that I know my value, and that's one that no one could take away from me. And I've just, for me, my community is extremely important, and I will continue to fight and do whatever I can for them. But just knowing that my value is such that no one could really touch or take away from me or question just because of the color of my skin.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That narrative is probably one that many, especially Afro-Latinas, can share. You're absolutely correct. Norman, in your experience, how have you experienced, either in your workplace or in your personal life, the concept that light is better or whiteness is better?
Yeah, and Consuela talked about it, but in terms of how history, right, colonization has impacted for many generations, right? So I remember when I was a young boy, I was dating a young girl, and she was beautiful, black, dark skin, long, dark hair, and my mother, who's native Mosquito Indian, said, "Why are you dating that black woman?" I'm like, "Well, because I like her, Mom." And she said, "Well, she's too dark for you." Right? So I never forget that experience, because that tells you how what she thought in her mind, that the lighter the better, right? Over time, of course, she changed. But we look at, and I think Anna also touched very clearly on that point in terms of there's so much division even within our own communities. And I remember when I was in college many years back, I was walking from my dorm to my classroom, and I stopped and I said hello to these guys from they were Nigerian and Zambian and from different African countries, and because I was the resident director, so we said hello and we talked, and I spoke a little bit of Kiswahili, so I said in Kiswahili, and then I kept moving on. It was an amazing experience, and I always remember it, and then I kept going, and then talked to these guys from El Salvador, from Latin America, and we talked in Spanish. And then I kept going, and then these white guys and the guy run track, and so they were on my track team. I said hello, and then I came by these African American young guys, and who one of them was my track team member as well. So this one other fellow said, "Hey brother, I'm confused." I said, "What are you confused about? Are you black?" And I said, "I don't understand the question." "Well, what are you? Because I hear you speaking all these languages." I said, "Well, yes, I am black. I mean, as you could see, my skin color is pretty dark, and probably even darker than you are. But I'm also Indian and I had to tell him where I was from. I said, "But you're not black then." I said, "What do you mean I'm not black?" So it was an interesting experience, because again, it tells you how we think and how we feel. And we don't talk much about it. We talk about black and white, or on this, especially here in America, about racism. But racism also exists in our countries, and we need to be. We have to accept that. There is classism, yes. There's economic disparities, yes. There's racism as well in our countries. We may not have been, as people of color, we may not have experienced what the African American trajectory history has been in this country. But if you go to Jamaica, you go to other countries, there was also a lot of misdoings and a lot of sad stories. In Nicaragua as well, sad stories, and we need to, be cognizant of those. So that, I think that's important to understand, to recognize, and we have to, at some point, as people, begin to recognize and really talk about it in a much more intentional manner. So that's what I think. So again, we look at media, and we did this. Even among our people, there's so much. I remember one of my friends, when in college, she said when she learned that I was from Nicaragua, and she was from Nicaragua too. She was from the West Coast. She was Hispanic, and she said, "Yo no sabía, I didn't know that people from the East Coast were educated or had their, I'm like, what do you mean by that? I didn't know you were smart enough to. I thought you guys were just, entertainers." I'm like, so again, that's how we have to, again, recognize these realities and really, really go at it intentionally.
Yes, I agree. Rafael, so coming from Venezuela, which is your home country, correct?
Correct.
I'm a pageant girl. I love watching pageants. And so when I watch, especially like the Miss Universe, I always see Miss Venezuela, but she doesn't look Latina. So tell me a little bit about your experience when it comes to skin color and maybe classism from your home country.
Absolutely. I want to start kind of off of Norman's story of his dating situation, because I find it really interesting how back in my high school days, if you were the dark, shorter guy, which, yes, me, you weren't looked at as much as the taller, white, lighter eyes color guy. And I always thought that was kind of a crazy idea. Like, what is white prettier than black or than brown? Like, who determines this? And of course, I wouldn't say that that's the case. There are beautiful people in all colors of skin, you can imagine. But that is, I think, one of the consequences of that colonization that you talk about. When they talk about Christopher Columbus and how he discovered America, and then I actually sit down with my grandfather and he tells me what actually went down in Venezuela. It wasn't pretty, but we don't talk about that in the history books necessarily. And then I think, wow, like, I get my color from the native Venezuelan Indians that were forced to do things, whatever, and mix with the white Spanish people that came and colonized my country. So I technically come from Indians too. And even within Venezuela, you hear these things from either your family members or people on the streets, saying, well, don't relate yourself with this kind of people. They're Indians. They're not smart enough. They don't know. You gotta have better friends. And that's crazy. I've known amazing people with an intellect that even surpasses my own, that, yes, have had maybe less opportunities that I've had, or less resources that I've had, and we're quite poor in comparison to me as far as finances go, but that we're wonderful people and that we're missing all of this potential and these wonderful connections that we can make just because someone had a terrible idea that skin color dictates the value of a person. So that's been my experience within my own culture. And gosh, there's a lot of racism amongst Venezuelans. It's insane when you actually measure it and you stop and look at it. As far as my workplace, I've been blessed, truly blessed and privileged, because My first job was at GRCC, and I'm still at GRCC. And it's been a wonderful place. I'm not trying to, create this as an ad, but it really has been a fantastic place to work at. And I've never really encountered that. So I want to say I'm privileged, but even within my own family, I've caught some family members saying some pretty terrible things. I have to look at them and say, hey, just because that person has a darker skin color doesn't mean what you're just implying. Just chill. So yeah, it's present, it's alive, it's there, it's everywhere you look within our own culture, within my own skin color. And it's
Absolutely. That's the purpose for this conversation today. So
Yeah.
thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Sergio, I heard several examples about how our own Latino brothers and sisters are upholding some of the white supremacy ideologies. What have been some of your experiences in some of the work that you've done where you've witnessed that, where Latinos are upholding, the white ideology or the white supremacy?
So the way I see it a lot is like in meritocracy, and how we don't even own our own life trajectory. Our definition of success is imposed on us, and we just embrace it as like, okay, you're going to go to college, you're going to do all these things, and you're going to behave and dress this way and talk this way and express yourself this way and practice these religions. And when you do so, you're successful and you're worthy and contributing member of society here in the US. And I think it's not just here. I think we're primed and we're socialized from our own countries of origin, where in some cases we were the oppressors. We were the ones that sustain these systems of oppression and the stratification that exists. And so we come here and then we become the victims of this oppression. And very naturally, our brain is already formed in that way. So we understand, oh, in this country, then I'm lower in this strata. And I think that's the way I've seen it here. I see it in the workplace where we have to act like white people, behave like white people, use their modes of doing business, use their time frames, use the way that they talk, the way they express themselves, and the way they treat each other. And when we do it in the workplace, we have to leave behind who we are as a people and behave like white people. And when I talk about being professional, the way we dress, leave that behind. Why can't we show up the way we are? Why can't we show up in huaraches? Why can't we challenge, the way we our women are allowed to dress at work, and the way men are supposed to dress at work? I think that's all related to white supremacy, and we've embraced it. And so the way it shows up, I see it, and especially in older generations, that we need to be grateful for, establishing the foundation on which we're able to build a better, Grand Rapids in different ways, or Michigan, wherever everyone is in this group. We see it in people kind of holding us to this, our oppressors' culture, our oppressors' quote unquote professional practices that are not really associated with professionalism and what it takes to do our work correctly. So that's how I see it, in more subtle ways at work, in my professional experience. And it's something that I'm working, I'm recovering from that. I still want to behave in those ways, and even in organizing, where Latinos tell us with Movimiento Cosecha, don't show up like that, don't show up disrespectful. What are these white people going to think about us? And I'm and they're trying to tell us that's not how we do business, especially people in business sector trying to tell us you need to be respectful. That's not how you're going to win over these politicians. And I'm dude, you got some work to do. Decolonize your brain, because that behavior has gotten you where you are, but has not helped your community and the way it could help your community. You're not being as effective in bringing about change.
It's a powerful message. Thank you, Sergio. Consuela, I know you do a lot of advocacy in your work, as well as not just your work, but also in in your role with the Hispanic Latino Commission, what are some ways that you've seen other Latinos upholding white supremacy or white ideology?
That's a loaded question. I can say academically, I remember some students basically was saying, some students was like, okay, what is Consuela? She's confused. She don't know if she wants to be a or not, right? And that was in college. In elementary school, it was the same thing. They didn't know what I was. So I suffered a lot of physical and emotional abuse. I used to get beat all the time. They would change my name to Connie Francis instead of calling my whole name. And then as a professional now, for instance, I was mentoring a Guatemalan boy for 4 years, 4 years. Seeing his parents would come to the job, pick him up, I would drop him off, and he was graduating from high school. And so I'm standing outside his house, really next door. My brother lived next door, and he comes, his father comes, and comes up to me, and he's speaking in English. I respond to him in Spanish, right? Like, hey, how you doing? Like, and he's looking at me, wondering like, who am I? So my brother comes up and he's asking my brother, who am I? He's like, that's my sister. He's like, really? She's Black, right? They're having this conversation about me right next to them. And I said, sir, I've been tutoring your son for 4 years. We've seen each other. He said, but I didn't know it was you. And and so like even now, it carries over into my leadership. I represent everyone, especially as a victim advocate. When crimes and things that impact our community, they don't receive the same help as anybody else does. And so being there as an advocate to ensure that there's transparency, there's dignity, how our people are treated, I'm the only person that's doing that. Sometimes I get ignored, but I've learned to advocate for myself first and foremost, and I'm very unapologetic. It's time to get the work done. And if you can't get with that, then that's fine by me, but we have to do the work right now.
Yeah. Thank you. And thank you for your work and advocacy as well.
Thank you.
And so our idea of beauty many times is built on this foundation, right, of what the media tells us or what our families even say, saying things like pelo malo or para mejorar la raza, right, to make our race better. We should marry someone who's light. That was my experience, unfortunately. Or even saying things, backhanded compliments. You're pretty for a dark girl. Like, how could you not be pretty just because you're dark, right? So what are some other ways that your families have perpetuated? Norman shared about dating a beautiful Black woman. But what are some other ways that your families maybe have perpetuated this belief system? Anna, would you be willing to share?
Sure. In that aspect, I've been blessed. My mom, my grandma, who was the one that raised me, we never had those type of conversation. But when I was growing up with my brothers, they always said, Anna, you have to avanzar la raza, or yo voy a casarme con alguien más claro para avanzar la raza. So it was important to them, but never was so important to me. Although if you look at my husband, he doesn't look like me, although he is Latino, from another region of the Dominican Republic. So he will pass like white. But it wasn't because of the color of his skin. It was because the compatibility and his willingness to be part of my life that allowed me to allow him into my life. So, you know, I have been part of situations where people make comments to him like, ¿qué haces con esa negra? ¿Verdad? Or what are you doing with that black girl? You know, but I guess that's something that he needs to answer. I don't need to care about those type of comments. I don't need to litigate with those type of people. I just know, like I mentioned before, you know, I know my value and I stand on my ground, and whoever wants to be in my life, they want to, not because they need to. So I'm in a point in my life to be completely honest and clear with you that I'm only, and this is something that I even share with friends of mine. And I always tell them, I only want to be around people that are genuine, that really have the best interests at heart for me, and that see me, right? If you cannot see who I am, that means that it's your loss, and I don't want you close to me. Yes, I know a lot of people and I interact with a lot of people, and I do a lot for a lot of people because that's who I am. But at the end of the day, Anna goes into her home, close that door, that deal with the situations in my life. So I'm very straight to the point. You know, I don't like beating around the bush. If I don't like something, I just say it. And I think, you know, when you are hit with such a level of racism and you have to deal with colorism and all these other isms that you could be part of, it comes a point, at least in my life, that I say, you know what, it's what it is. If you don't like it, that's your problem. And this is who I am. And then I continue being who I know the value that I bring to anyone's life.
Awesome. It also took me to become an adult to fall in love with my brown skin. And Sergio early on talked about how many of us sometimes want to shed our skin out of, you know, shame because of racism and colorism. My mother hated when I would be out in the sun. And she hated it when I would get dark. And I never really understood why. I'm Mexican, right? Aren't Mexicans brown? Well, not really understanding growing up, right? That there are so many shades of Latinos and the skin tones that we show up in. And, you know, my mother intentionally, when we stopped moving as migrants, raised us in an all-white community because she wanted to make sure that her daughters married white men. Mm-hmm. And this is something I never understood until I became an adult. And it was something that I had to fight and overcome to find the pride in who I am as a bilingual Latina in West Michigan.
Mm-hmm. But I want to point something out though, Sandra. Mm-hmm. One thing that I remember when I was little that my grandma always told me was, Anna, and she did mention this to me, and I was like probably 7, 8, 9 years old approximately. And she said, if you go to school and you get an education, anything you want, but if you make sure that you get the education and you have a bank account and you don't need anything from anybody, whatever people believe of you should never be important. Never. So I concentrated on making sure that I went out and got an education. My bank account is not that anybody could have, but I make sure that I brought value into my life, and I make sure that I try to be as genuine as I possibly can, because that's my richness, right? That's my goal, and that's my legacy.
That's beautiful. And thank you for sharing that and standing firm in it. Sergio, coming from the region in Mexico, are there any sayings or beliefs around whiteness or lightness? I know I've heard, the darker you are, te pareces que eres del rancho, right? Like And that means like you either look indigenous or you look like you're from like a village somewhere, which is lower in the caste system. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, we're from southern Mexico, or actually, yeah, middle Mexico. And so when we came to northern Mexico, there's more people that were like whiter, right? And so they used to make fun of us for being Indian. That's what they used to call us. And as a kid, like as adults, I can say that, oh yeah, I'm proud and my values. That doesn't count when you're a kid. When you're a kid, if everyone's making fun of you, there is something wrong with you. If the majority of the kids are telling you you're too dark or you're like an Indian, like, and that's apparently something bad, you're gonna believe that. And then if your parents tell you, their parents make fun of other people, or if they talk of, like you said, like, marry someone that's lighter skin, yes. And then you bring it out of the context of like the entire country is like mestizos, mixed race, right? In Mexico, everyone is like mixed, black, I'm sorry, like Native American and white Spaniards to some extent. That really matters. I saw that happening. And now I mentioned at the beginning that it took me this long to start embracing who I really am. And, kind of coming to love my people and myself in that way. It's a struggle. I think it's a journey that we all need to make, especially Mexico is hurting. Mexico is broken. As a people, we are broken. As a people, we still have that problem with the internalized racism, and then we come here and we feed right into it. And I think that for me, where I am now, it's no longer like it's no longer enough for me to know that and understand that and find the beauty in who I am and where I come from. It's kind of like Spider-Man, power comes with responsibility. And it's up to us because we made it out of that, right? We made that journey to where we are now, and we embrace ourselves. But there's kids out there, there's adults still raising kids to believe that because they're brown, because they're black, because they're whatever, and not however distance they are from whiteness, that they're not as good. And then they don't have to say to them outward, they show it with their action. And I think people in our positions of leadership or prominence or whatever, we're anybody who has a platform and that has made their journey to where they are now and they come to love themselves for who they are, have that responsibility and I see it just like we have a challenge to make it out of poverty and have success. And the same applies to who we are and how we see ourselves in terms of race and loving ourselves for being indigenous, for being black, for whatever we are. And we have that same responsibility to help our people to make it out of that space of hating ourselves, of having internalized racism, and stopping that and raising kids that will perpetuate that.
Thank you so much for that. At this time, I would like to remind our audience, if you have any questions for the panelists, please put them in the Q&A box. I would like for our panelists to unmute yourself as you feel led to speak, but I want to wrap this up with just what are some actions that we as Latinos can take to end colorism within our own communities? What's some advice or some actions that you think we need to take to end colorism and to advance our people and do it together? And feel free to unmute your mic and speak freely.
I'd like to address that if I can. I think one of my greatest challenges would be to empathize with those that might be going against me. And what I've done, and it's been hard, is just facing it straightforward. Anyone that might come to me with a racist comment or with whatever problem they might have, or with a snarky comment like, oh, of course, because all you Mexicans, because for some reason, if you're brown, you're Mexican. Nothing else exists. It's like Latin America, it's just Mexico, which would be great. I love Mexico in general, but anyways, is to sit down with them and legitimately try to love them. It's hard because they're obviously transgressing against you, but just trying to love people and realize that it's technically not their fault. I mean, for how many generations has this been going on? And they've been brought into it just like maybe we have into some other things, and just trying to have some compassion at the same time that we're firm in what we believe in and respecting ourselves, and trying to have that discourse and that conversation. There's going to be people that won't want to have it, and that's fine. But those that do, they'll legitimately learn. I've had people ask me if we had television in Venezuela, or what part of Mexico was Venezuela located. Things like that. You know, some people just don't know, because all they've seen is their cozy home in, you know, West Michigan, and 600 megabyte speed internet and great things that, trust me, many of us grew without. and they just don't know. So I think one of the best things that we can do is to do our best to love ourselves and know ourselves well enough that we can love others, regardless of whether they agree with us or not, and shake their hand and try to get them to understand, because I'm convinced I'm not going to change the world, but maybe our future generations will, and maybe that world is going to be better. So that's my take on that.
Thank you, Rafael. That was beautiful. Norman.
Yes, thank you for the question. So I was remembering saying that my grandfather always told to me, he said, Lupiki, nahabekanuki mika nahkaluanaya magadupika na yamang sam nahkayaw. Bang nahanukia ba diara sud ba damdah pika mansika uplikina yah yabakadara usalisa. So what I just said is my grandfather always told us in a short sentence, you know, son, you know, remember where you're from, where you come from, and remember the riches that motherland gave you. And for you to love yourself means loving your neighbor, loving your enemy as much as you love yourself. So to carry on what we've learned as people to others that don't understand and who are ashamed of what they are, is important for us to take on that. So I think, you know, when you ask your question, what can we do, is, you know, continue the conversation, you know, be intentional, be as clear as possible in terms of let's know our histories, let's, you know, educate ourselves onto, you know, what did colonization do to us, what happened with all that, what happens today in our country here in the US, in terms of why are we so divided? I mean, so we have to really know more than ever. I mean, we're looking at we went through an election where 70 million plus, you know, feel a certain way, and so why is that? And then another percentage of within our own people, within our Latinx population, what's going on? So let's have that intentional conversation, and I appreciate you, Sonia, doing this, because I think this is an important conversation to have, and let's continue it on. And we, you know, to trump hate, we have to love each other, but to love each other, we have to understand each other and know about each other's culture and understanding of how we see things. So that's what I think.
Thank you, Norman. Anna, I see you have your mic unmuted.
I will say to that, we have to continue to be intentional. The intentionality is the key. And I think at this point, we know better. We know that a lot of people don't have the same ideas or ideology that we have. And we need to continue making that point. We know that we have to work twice as hard when we are in a position. We know that we have to do things 3 times the load when we have a position, because we not only proven ourselves around us, but we need to prove to ourselves that we belong in that space. And if we belong in that space, you know, and if I'm sitting on those tables, I'm just going to go ahead and continue to be clear, direct, and, you know, as sincere as I possibly could be. And having those conversations. And one thing that I want to mention, though, it is imperative that we lift up one another, regardless of the color of their skin. It's completely unacceptable for us, not just because you Mexican or Dominican, Guatemalan, It doesn't matter where you're from. We need to make sure that we rally around each other and make sure that we lift up one another. If one is running, we running with them. If one needs a position, we help them then get there. If we need to go behind, and sometimes we have to do things behind the scene because it's better for us. We have more power being behind the scene than if we're on the front line. But those that decide to be on the front line, they need to know that we are backing them up, right? So we definitely need to be intentional. We definitely need to make sure that we continue having conversations like this and letting people know that racism, colorism is not something that it's not okay to do, right? It's not okay to just continue to judge people by the color of their skin and not the content of their heart, right? So it's imperative for us to continue the conversation.
Thank you so much for that. We do have a question from a member in our audience. And the question is, and this would be open to any of you willing to answer. Can you think of a moment which you experienced in Michigan, which made you feel like meaningful progress is happening? Can you think of a moment which you experienced in Michigan, which made you feel like meaningful progress is happening?
I can give an example of when I felt that way recently when Black organizers were organizing marches here in Grand Rapids to protest police violence and brutality against Black Americans. There was a collaboration between Movimiento Cosecha and Black organizers here in which we were helping to coordinate it and provide some support. And I think that that's to me personally has been it gave me a lot of hope. And to have one example where two grassroots organizations were collaborating on something so important. And this happened behind the scenes, like the public never knew that it was happening. But I think that to me is progress. I think the topic we're covering has gone a long way to separate us and divide us. And I think it takes intentional because this doesn't come to us naturally because it's been, our oppressors have made it so that we don't work together. And so this time when this collaboration happened between Movimiento Cosecha and Black organizers was a moment when I saw that.
Thank you for sharing that experience. Any other panelists that have an example?
I remember probably let's say about 6 years ago. I left academia for a little bit and went into served as the executive director of the Hispanic consortium of organizations here in Southeast Michigan. And there was a very prominent leader in the community, very powerful even today. And I remember we were having our first meeting of the collaboration of organizations, and she clearly said, este negro, ¿quién cree que es? And I was a little hurt. But I stood my ground and I approached her and I said, thank you for coming to the meeting, but I want to talk with you about what you said and how damaging that was. And but if we had, and then we had youth, we had a ton of youth in our meeting too, because of part of the program, and for them to have heard that, right? That is what I think hurt the most, because these youth were able to witness that experience. And after continuous conversations and over time, I left Michigan for a little bit and I went to Kansas, and I came back. A little after I came back, I went to a meeting in the community, and I saw her, and she said, "Norman, I need to apologize to you." And I said, "Why?" Because there's an experience that happened many years ago that I did not recognize how racist I was. And she used that word, racist. And I said, "You know what? I thank you for that. And what we need to do is move forward, but also carry on the message that it's important for us to recognize our differences and the beauty of our differences. And she's a great advocate and a good friend today. And She's the comadre of the community. That's who she is. But for that personally, I think was a testament to how much work we have to do, right? And it takes time, it takes patience, it takes continuous intentionality, continuous transparency. I mean, so much of it, but the work has to continue on, because if we don't, we will, especially our younger ones, it's gonna be hard.
Thank you for sharing that experience. And as we get ready to end our conversation today, I want to say thank you to each of our panelists for giving your time, sharing your lived experience, your words of wisdom and advice. I also take this time to thank everyone who made today's presentation seamless. Mr. Jonathan Wheeler, who is the Administrative Assistant of the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion here at GRCC, and members of our media team, Mr. Noah DeSmit and Mr. Klaas Quant. Before we leave, I want to share with you a Mayan greeting that you say, in la ketch, and the response is a la ken. And what that means is, I am another you. And the response is, you are another me. What that means is, if I don't love you as my neighbor or my brother or sister, I can't love myself. So we must love each other to love ourselves. So please, as you continue out throughout your day, throughout your week, the rest of the month, and as we journey on throughout the rest of this pandemic, please remember to love one another. That is the only way we will continue to make progress in this world that is so divided. And the only thing that will bring us together is unity and love. So peace. Thank you all for being with us this afternoon, and stay safe and healthy.